Do what thou wilt should be the whole of the law. Hyperabyssic Ontology, Part 3, the Symbolism of the Supernal Triad. Although my methodology is both historical and material, and therefore somewhat against the grain of his own more theosophically positivist frame of interpretation, I nevertheless take seriously James Eshelman's exhortation in his magnum opus, The Mystical and Magical System of the AA, to, quote, pay close attention to the Tree of Life's common representation of A, human consciousness, B, the universe, and C, the path of initiation. Your understanding of your inner processes will grow to the extent that you perceive the absolute necessity that all three be represented by a common model and are able to witness the ongoing patterns of their interrelationship. Unquote. It is language, inclusive of all modes of symbolic signification, that functions to construct the psyche such that the threefold ontological homology, posited by Eshelman as subsisting between the self, the social world, and the sacred, can be represented by the symbolism of the supernal triad of the Tree of Life, when it is interpreted in terms of Jacques Lacan's triad of the symbolic, the imaginary, and the real. Lacan famously declared that the Freudian unconscious is structured as a language. Likewise, for the Tree of Life, language is the historically concrete phenomenon mediating the patterns of interrelationship, subsisting between the various symbolic registers of the tree. All its interpretive aspects are thereby constitutively interpenetrated by what Lacan calls the symbolic order, which is the virtual supersubjectivity of language itself, against the background of which our private psychological sense of individual subjectivity constructs itself through the subject's lifelong process of socialization, its learning and internalizing the social force field of linguistic usages that surrounds it. This function of the subject's internalization or self-inscription of the symbolic order, Lacan names the imaginary. Meanwhile, the incomplete and incompletable quality, the imaginary's inscription by the symbolic, is called the real. It imparts the psyche's ecstatic, in the sense of standing outside or in excess of itself, character. Setting aside for the moment the initiatory ascent of the tree to focus on the primary dyad of the internal psychological microcosmic dimension of the tree and its external interpersonal macrocosmic aspect. The dialectical mediation of this pair dynamically relates the personal and the social, the inner and outer poles of human experience, in virtue of language's liminal, virtual, ontological character, the psychosocial effects of which Lacan describes in terms of his triad of the real, the symbolic, and the imaginary, which I read as corresponding to Kether, Hokmah, and Binah, respectively. Kether symbolizes the real, corresponding to the Kabbalistic zero, but now from the standpoint of that concept's relationships to the function of the symbolic and the imaginary, symbolized by Hokmah and Binah. The real stands for the absent metaphysical essence or totality of the subject's experience, due to the self's incomplete and outstanding temporality. Nevertheless, in and through its absence, the real asserts itself as a kind of presence in the form of a warping of psychic space, metaphorically like the effect of gravitation as described by general relativity. Thereby, the orbital movement of the primal will of the death drive about the absent core of the self establishes itself anterior to libidinal desire as the ultimate constitutive horizon of the subject's coalescence in and through language. The primal will is symbolized by Hokmah, which in turn inseminates or saturates with vivifying affectivity Binah, which stands for the linguistic form matrix of learned vocabulary and grammar, generating the virtual reality of self-conscious experience by permitting us to name and thereby understand and meaningfully situate ourselves within the intersubjective objectivity of the shared world ongoingly disclosed by and as human history. The tree's representation of the ontogenetic cut of Oedipal castration, or the formation of the psyche through its socialization through language, thereby requires the additional enumeration of the second and third Sephiroth of Hokmah and Bina beyond the absence-presence of the unity of Kether, and which therefore together with Kether form the Supernal Triad at the apex of the tree. The equilateral triangle formed by the geometric symbolization of the supernals introduces a horizontal component to the developing tree in the axis formed between Hokmah and Bina, depending from the absent apex of Kether. If the vertical dimension of the tree of life expresses the death drive as the process of psychological individuation via the negative abstraction of subjectification, then the tree's horizontal extension signifies the life drive of the libidinal economy underlying the psyche's assignment of affect. Because affectivity, or love, must actualize itself through the representation of objects to which it assigns its affirmations and negations, all affectivity necessarily occurs against a linguistic background whose categories have always already been the historical expressions of patriarchal divisions of social labor. This explains why, in the traditional interpretation of the Tree of Life, which, like all systems of representation, is a historical production, reflecting the ideological coordinates of its originating contexts, heteronormative gender polarity overdetermines the significance of the tree's division into twin-gendered pillars, extending the length of the tree, whose series of sexually dimorphic oppositions, Hokmah, Bina, Hesed, Geburah, Netzach, and Hod, are mediated by an androgynously designated middle pillar, Kether, Tiferet, Yesod, Malkut. Therefore, at the supernal layer of the tree, patriarchy has already inscribed itself as the basic attributions of the active, seminal, and phallic creative impulse or will to Hokmah, and the feminine, reflexive faculty of understanding the phallic word to Bina. Or, according to Gershom Scholem, referring to a Jewish context, Hokmah and Bina are, quote, Abba and Imma, father and mother, which serve as the supreme archetype for that process of coupling, Hebrew zivug, which in its metaphorical aspect of looking face to face, translating the Hebrew expression histikalet panim befanim, is the common root of all intellectual and erotic unions. However, Aleister Crowley's deployment of traditionally masculine and feminine gender language to describe the symbolism of Hokmah and Bina should not mislead us into missing the fact that his gender attributions are suffused with deliberately homonormative ambiguities and reversals that undermine the patriarchal valences of the received tradition. For example, in the Book of Lies, Crowley writes that chaos and Babylon are Hokmah and Bina, chapter 33. However, together they signify a seeming duality of chaos and Babylon. These are called father and mother, but it is not so. They are called brother and sister, but it is not so. They are called husband and wife, but it is not so, unquote. It's chapter 32. Already at the level of the supernals, the dimorphic gender symbolism of the Tree of Life breaks down before it has even begun. It is not so that Hokmah simply and directly is male and Bina female, because Kabbalistic correspondences are symbolic metaphors, not isomorphic correlations of representations to facts according to a correspondence theory of truth. In contrast, the kind of correspondence posited by the interpretive system of the Kabbalah is pragmatically diverse, carried out through the interplay of multiple language games that indefinitely permutate the possible meanings of any given exegetical object. This makes the Kabbalah hermeneutically open towards the diversification of gender language and self-expression of gender norms, both in a Jewish context as well as in the hybrid Jewish-Gentile context of the new eon, as the patriarchal legacy of the old eon is challenged and gradually overcome. Crowley continues, quote, How infinite is the distance from this to that, yet all is here and now, unquote. Chapter 32. According to the esoteric cipher of the Book of the Law, all stands for the divine predicate El, Aleph Lamed, which is equivalent by gematria to La, Lamed Aleph, which is not. Phenomena contain their own negation, or in Thelemic terminology, they express the Kabbalistic zero, which brings them into mediation despite their diversity. Quote, nor is there any there or then, for all that is. What is it but a manifestation that is, a part that is a falsehood of that which is not, unquote. Chapter 32 of the Book of Lies. Criteria that would demarcate and fix the boundaries of sexual difference are absent and elided because of the underlying condition of the Kabbalistic zero, that which is not, that informs all beings. Any overarching organic unity that would totalize the meaning of gender and establish a fixed hierarchy of differences is missing in action, relativized against the more ultimately basic background of the Kabbalistic zero. Love expressed on all planes, not conformance to patriarchal gender norms, is therefore the basis of Thelemic theurgy. Operating as a theurgy of liberation, the Thelemic paradigm generates irrepressible permutations of love upon the tree of life whose jouissance disturbs and exceeds the limits of any system of patriarchally normative gender dimorphism. Crowley's meditation entitled The Pole Star reads in part, quote, love is all virtue, since the pleasure of love is but love, and the pain of love is but love. Love taketh no heed of that which is not and of that which is. Absence exalteth love, and presence exalteth love. Love moveth ever from height to height of ecstasy, and faileth never. The wings of love droop not with time, nor slacken for life or for death. Love destroyeth self, uniting self with that which is not self, so that love breedeth all and none in all, or none in one. Unquote. And that's from section 66 of the Book of Lies by Aleister Crowley. Love is the law, love under